U.S. leaving Niger. Today's short was about, gee whiz, are we actually going to leave Niger after the coup junta asked us to leave? Apparently, the news over the past 12 hours is, I think the Post broke this, that the United States has conceded that, yes, we will leave Niger, which is kind of extraordinary. I made a video called WTF, what the F is the U.S. doing in Africa, gosh, 2-3 years ago now. But it's, if you just scroll down the video tab, you can find it, talking about how little noticed terrible U.S. policy in Africa was. We knocked over Gaddafi in 2011. This created a chain reaction of collapsing governments and jihadi militias and weapons flowing across the Sahel. We, of course, decided to, with the help of some militants on the ground, branded as, oh no, we're fighting jihad here, when really what we were doing was trying to pick up the pieces from Libya that we broke. There were some very initial successes in Mali directly after the Libyan intervention. Jihadist-coded militants took over all of Mali. France, with U.S. support, was able to push them back. That was in 2012, I think, and that was pretty much the last success of French and U.S. counterterror operations in Africa. I would maintain that a lot of the jihadists that we were fighting were really just not completely, but some were many quite legitimately disgusted elements of the populations of these progressively more and more militarized countries. In the aughts, these countries were experiencing, many of them, some of them even double-digit GDP growth, but 5, 8, 10% growth under largely democratic-ish governments, obviously, very fraught, it being as poor countries as they were, but democratic-ish countries with 5 to 10% GDP growth. Since the NATO destruction of Libya, we've had a complete lost economic decade. The amount of money that the U.S. has been transferring there, most of what the U.S. has been doing there, has been some direct battling of militants. Famously, 4 special forces guys were killed in Niger in, I want to say, 2016, 17, and the classic Lindsey Graham quote was, "The U.S. has troops in Niger?" He's a Republican U.S. senator that is nominally an expert in foreign policy. But most of what we've done there over the past 20 years is train militaries. That's actually a lot of what U.S. Special Forces do. That's a lot of what the U.S. military does, is train other militaries and train them up to the point where they can buy U.S. weapons. We've certainly subsidized U.S. weapons. We subsidize a lot of training for these militaries. And in country after country, what these militaries have done is throw out the barely functioning democracies that were in charge. So we basically created a generation of coup junta leaders. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are now all run by this class. And they've all, quite understandably, considering a decade plus of failure, have opted to kick out the French and the United States. Circa 3 years ago, I think there's an article in the Wall Street Journal, maybe it's just 2 years ago, talking about how Niger is the last bastion of U.S. counter-terror efforts in Africa. We spent $100 million building a drone base in $100 million plus building a drone base in Niger. And we trumpeted the stability of Niger and how they were our bulwark against terrorism. And inevitably, at some point in 2023, that military we'd been beefing up throughout the democratic government that we claim to be supporting. And it appears thanks to a pretty insulting meeting that AFRICOM and the U.S. State Department had with representatives of this junta. A month ago, we were asked to leave. So this means abandoning what's left of the U.S. war on terror in the Sahel, This means abandoning a $100 million drone base. And it seems like over the past 24 hours, the U.S. has conceded that we will do that. I don't know if that's true. Perhaps that's a negotiating position. Perhaps there's still a hope or an assumption in the United States that if we actually say we're leaving, the Niger junta will be like, actually, if you give us this, and this, you can stay here. Maybe that's something that's going to develop. But if not, I think this is really uncritically great news. Like this is very cool, and I think it would be a great thing if that were the case. But I'm not 100% sure about that. Will the U.S. leaving lead directly to peace? No, I don't think so. I think these are countries that are deeply, deeply screwed up. I think that there are definitely Wagner mercenaries, Russian representatives that are rushing into these countries to try to be helpful and friendly, which often translates to a greater level of war crimes being committed against jihadists, which are probably mostly just ethnic or other dissidents. That's not great. But as with Afghanistan, I think that or Vietnam, Southeast Asia more generally, the first step towards peace is getting the United States the hell out of there and allowing things to shake out. So probably for the next couple of years, we're going to get some really dark stories out of Africa, or even worse, we may not hear anything at all, but we'll learn years down the line that a bunch of horrible things happened. But with the U.S. out of there, there's a chance of getting back to stability again, as we saw in Afghanistan recently and Southeast Asia over the past 50 years. So fingers crossed. Yunus Kabir asks, what do you think about the new Sahel Confederation between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger? This is a fascinating dynamic. It's a little nerve-wracking because it's like, great, so there's now warring coalitions in the Sahel. It doesn't sound great. My instinct when I look at things is to use European analogs. So just the idea of African countries putting together ententes or axes or groups of allies that are in opposition to each other is troubling. Because there's the ECOWAS, is that the Economic Cooperation of West African States or something? Conference? I don't know. That everybody used to belong to. Of course, in the aftermath of all these coups, ECOWAS, which I guess at this point is mostly just reliant on Nigeria, right, started threatening interventions in some of these coup territories. So Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, three countries that are run by coup juntas at this point, decided to affiliate with each other and threaten a wider war if such an intervention happened. Thankfully, it does not appear that the threatened ECOWAS interventions are going to happen, which is a very good thing. Yeah, so who knows? Maybe I guess at root, the Sahel Confederation is about independence from U.S. and French influence. They're all working with the Russians, which I expect them all to be disappointed by. I don't expect the Russians to be long-term any more successful than the Americans and French were in, violent state formation efforts. So that Russian aspect doesn't really particularly bother me. I do like more independence. I don't like the prospect of a broader African war, but it does seem like the prospect of a broader African war seems to be diminishing. And it is entirely possible that this coup confederation, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, I think there are elements within all of these countries that would like to go back to sort of more normal elections. So I guess we'd have to see when that shakes out. James Parker, yeah, I think that was a Wall Street Journal article. The firewall article, that's what it was. It wasn't bulwark, it was firewall was the terminology that I think the Wall Street Journal used to talk about the U.S. position in Niger, which is now evaporating. Maybe, yeah. Remember that firewall article, says James Parker? Maybe they meant we've started a wall of fire across the Sahel. Local Extreme says, it's still funny to me that Burkina Faso had 2 coups in 1 year. I think Mali's also a member of the 2 coup club. Is a Russian influence in those Sahel countries a true thing? Yes, it is a true thing. But I think it's kind of overstated. And frankly, the Russian influence is, by its very nature, more pro-independence than the U.S. and French influence because it's so much weaker. Russia is not going to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars to build a tremendously complex drone operation in the middle of Niger. Russia will send people who will go do war crimes in return for gold. That's sad and doesn't reflect well on Russia, but it's not, I think it's just objectively not as anti-freedom as having France, the historic colonial hegemon, and the United States, the current world hegemon, that's just looking to set up sort of drone and bombing operations everywhere, with more and more tangential relations to the reality of any kind of terrorist threat. That's worse than Russian influence, I would say. I remember we refused to leave Iraq when the Iraqi government asked us to leave after we killed Soleimani. Yep, that's certainly what we did. But I think our interests in Iraq are a lot higher than our interests in Niger, so it's imaginable to me that we would actually leave. By the way, for those who don't know, there's a patrons-only Discord. Feel free to join, says Lola. Yes, if you are on here and you have not yet joined the patrons-only Discord, I'd highly recommend it. I learn a lot on that Discord, in fact. And we also do monthly sort of Zoom chats on the Discord. Our last one of those was last weekend, so it'll probably be another 3-4 weeks before we do that again, but it's a fun event.